chances are that you've never played this game. This is the first Kyuukyoku Harikiri Stadium for the Famicom. In a way, you can think of this as a sort of combination of bases loaded and RBI baseball. And there's a lot of stuff here that you simply do not see in other 8-bit baseball games. Now, for sure, this is an impressive game, right? I mean, it's almost as impressive as my getup here, right? But is this game really all that good? Well, today we're going to find out. And there's something else I've got to tell you guys. I've got kind of a confession to make. I have started a project that I haven't exactly told you guys all about. So as you guys know already, I'm obsessed with vintage baseball games. That includes playing all sorts of these games, not just video games. The idea is to play and get to know all of these games, not just the good ones. And of course, that means arguing with a lot of you guys about which of these games are good and which games really suck. But the thing is that I don't just want to play the baseball games that came out in North America. I want to play all the baseball games, right? Like everything. And so I've decided to start going through the Japanese games, starting with these Famicom baseball games in the order that they came out in. Depending on how you count them, there are something like 50 baseball games on the Famicom. Some of these are games that you're already familiar with, but I want to play the Japanese versions as well just to see what they're like. Some of these are games that were never released outside of Japan, and in many cases, that is a good thing. And some games are sequels that look a lot like the first game, but are actually quite different. So that's the case for Famicom 87, right? This looks just like the first Famicom game. But if you spend serious time playing it, like if you beat the game, you will realize that they've changed a lot, including a lot about how the physics of the game actually work. And that's the reason why I've been spending just a little bit of extra time trying to play as much as I can of these games. Now, there's always a big risk to doing a project like this, since some of these games are pretty obscure. As a result, the views on this kind of video tend to be a little bit lower than normal. But I figure that these games are more interesting if I take the time to research them and explain them to you instead of just uploading raw game footage, which is what most other people have already done. And of course, some of these games look just awesome, and it's a shame that they were never released outside of Japan. Now, the game that we've got today looks like a great game, but I'm still on the fence as to whether it plays like a great game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. This game is the 6th baseball game to come out for the Famicom. That includes the FDS game, Exciting Baseball. And that's not really a normal Famicom game, so maybe you want to count it, maybe you don't. Anyway, like I said, this is called Kyuukyoku Harikiri Stadium, which means something like Ultimate Enthusiasm Stadium. And this is the first Famicom baseball game created by Taito. So Taito was no stranger to creating games for the Famicom or the MSX or for the arcades or for a bunch of other video game systems. In fact, Taito already had a few hits under its belt by the time that this baseball game came out in 1988. Arkanoid, for example, was originally a Taito arcade game back in 1986. And I bet anything that you're already familiar with Bubble Bobble, which was Taito's other huge hit. Now, Taito was also the company behind Little Samson, which is one of those rare NES games that collectors absolutely have to have. But of course, Taito never became a household word quite the way that Konami and Capcom did. Anyway, Taito's baseball game was a step ahead of the competition in a few ways and a step behind in a few other ways. And there's really no better way for me to explain this to you than to just show you. Now, I'm going to do this the way that you usually do evaluations at work, assuming that your boss isn't a jerk, right? And maybe that's a big assumption to make. So we're going to start with the positive stuff, right? And then we're going to find some of those opportunities for improvement. So let's start with the most obvious positive thing about this game, which would be the graphics. graphics. So to be frank with you, the graphics in this game are amazing for 1988. While the fielding mode graphics might not be all that impressive, they're better than Bases Loaded and are at least on par with RBI Baseball. Now, Bases Loaded has a superior pitching perspective in my opinion, but the fielding is not the best in the world. RBI Baseball is probably the most famous of these games, and I think that Taito's game actually might be a step up from this. But hey, you be the judge. And there are a couple of other extra things that Taito put into this game that really don't have an equivalent in those earlier Famicom baseball games. In fact, a lot of this stuff doesn't really exist in any North American baseball games either, though you can correct me if I'm wrong. Now, the most obvious difference here is the announcing team, which shows up from time to make observations. You'll see them show up most often when somebody makes a pitching change or brings in a pinch hitter. Now, if you play this game without a translation patch, don't worry too much about not understanding what they're saying. It's actually really boring. It's something like, I look forward to seeing this new relief pitcher. But the thing is, of course, that the substance here is not really the point. The point is that this is an NES baseball game with cutscenes, but not cutscenes that like detract from the game itself. These actually add something to the game. So like I said, you just don't see this in North America at all, not in the baseball games. This is actually even more impressive when you get to the end of the game. There's a somewhat extensive post-game show with a discussion of what happened. And if you happen to win, the announcer says roll the tape and shows you the most pivotal moments of your victory. Now, I don't think that this takes up a lot of memory, but the fact that this even exists is really fascinating to me, especially for a game from 1988. I Love Softball does a similar thing, but this isn't an actual clip from the gameplay. This is just like a stock clip art photo. So, in my opinion, the cutscenes that are at the end of each game, that's the highlight of Kyuukyoku Harikiri Stadium, right? And there's one other element that really makes this game simply fascinating. Even if you lose, you get the opportunity to upgrade your players. Losing means that you only get a single upgrade point, so you have to choose carefully who gets it. However, if you lose twice, you don't get the upgrade point the second time. If you win, however, you get something like 10 upgrade points. Note, however, that you can only use one upgrade point per player, which is really lame. In contrast, Baseball Stars corrected this by giving you more options to work with and more points to purchase and stuff, as well as actual in-game currency. And you have to remember that Baseball Stars, or Baseball Stars they called it, came out in Japan only about 6 or 7 months after this game was first released. So I do think that there was a really clear influence here. So Baseball Stars doesn't have Taito's cutscene system, right? But the actual upgrade concept itself is superior in Baseball Stars. In fact, it's one of the best systems I've seen in any baseball game anywhere. And that, of course, brings us to some of those opportunities for improvement. All right, we need to talk about this pitching system. It's harder to control these pitches than you think. After trying a bunch of different ways to curve the ball, I finally gave up and just started throwing meatballs down the heart of the plate. But even if I try to put a little bit of English on my pitches, I still get roasted for home runs like this. Now, I will admit, as always, that some of this is user error, and I've seen you guys in the comments. I know you're going to go on and on about you're playing this game wrong, that's why you don't like it, whatever. But at the same time, pitching in this game from that behind-the-back perspective is not as easy as it looks. This game really wants to be like Bases Loaded, or like half of Bases Loaded, but honestly, this game just gets it wrong. And this is one of those things where you really have to play it for yourself to fully understand what I'm talking about. Now, the manual explains here that curveballs and screwballs will break according to your pitcher's abilities. And once you get them evolved to a high enough level, you can start throwing these magic pitches, something I haven't seen quite yet. There's also apparently an automatic fielding option, though I haven't really explored that part yet either. But this is also one of those games that gets better the more that you play it. In that sense, I guess it's sort of like Base Wars, and it kind of hurts me to talk about that game again. The thing is, like Base Wars, the first like 2 times I played this game, I really didn't like it. See, that's the thing that Baseball Stars gets right. You have a good experience in Baseball Stars at the beginning, even if your team totally sucks. You just have to make sure you play another team that also sucks, right? But some of these games require you to really grind it out in the beginning, sort of like an RPG, before you can get to the really good stuff in the game. And it's really hard to grind it out when it's just a painful experience. The other problem I ran into is that I chose Team G, which is actually the best team in the game. So the computer then chose Team I, which is a team made up entirely of female idols. Hits were at a premium in this game, and it wasn't until the 5th inning that I finally got on the board with a home run. In fact, the only way I could score in that game was through the long ball, and notice that these were all with the bases empty. Meanwhile, we were giving up runs like crazy. And you'll notice, of course, that the fielding isn't always fair. So it's like the game determines that you're going to give up a base hit, so you're going to give up the hit. Your second baseman will be playing on the bag instead of playing in the hole where he belongs, or if it's hit to the left side, your third baseman will be glued to the bag even though there's nobody on base. It's really infuriating. And to be honest with you, we never really had a chance in this game. When I decided to play later as Team I, however, things were a lot different. The best part about Team I is that you have a bunch of girls who can really sock the baseball, like Akina. This, of course, is Akina Nakamori, and I can see why she's such a hit. Anyway, the entire team is filled with references like this. So I'm not sure if wanting to play as this team makes me like a dirty old nan or whatever, but hey, at least they can win. And to be honest with you, this game is a lot more fun if you can actually win. Seriously, once you get the hang of this team, you'll find that the game is actually pretty easy. But the problem, of course, is that the teams in this game are pretty unbalanced straight out of the box. And anyway, that's kind of my verdict for this game. There's some good and there's some bad. Now, the most comparable game that we have in North America is probably Tecmo Baseball. And to be honest with you, we really got the better end of that bargain. So I don't think that anybody considers Tecmo Baseball the best 8-bit baseball game, but it really does hold up in comparisons like this. Tecmo Baseball's pitching system not only looks better, but it's also a lot easier to control. Fielding is a little bit easier in Tecmo Baseball, even though I messed this up here, and you can throw the ball a lot faster. And Tecmo Baseball just feels a lot more polished and more professional, especially when you hit one of these game-winning home runs. Anyway, that's sort of my take on this game overall. Now, I do need to mention that there was a second version of Kyuukyoku Harikiri Stadium that came out also in 1988. So the first game came out in late June. The second was a data update in December. That's right, it was just a data update that cost the same as a brand new game. It is exactly the same as the first game, except with extra data, which is why I'm talking about it in this video. Technically, these games with Team I were played using the updated data version, at least I think. It's kind of hard to tell since everything in this game is exactly the same. In fact, as far as I understand, the chipset and everything else is exactly the same in the new data version. There is a different label on the cartridge that tells you it's the other version, but that's really all. And by the way, this was a huge controversy at this time in Japan. Like, okay, so this is something that we have to say, right? There's all this stuff where people talk about Japan so strange and it's so weird. Video game culture in Japan is different, blah, blah, blah. Not really. The truth is that Japanese video game consumers of the late 1980s were not stupid, right? They weren't. They could see that, like, this game was the same as the first game they just paid, however much money for, right? They knew that they were being taken advantage of by this really greedy company, and they knew that it was not going to be worth it to buy a new game at a full price when it's exactly the same as the old game. While the original game got good ratings, Biweekly Famitsu criticized it by pointing out that certain parts of the game seemed really slow and lethargic. The positive reviews noted that Taito had really put a lot of effort into the game, including a lot of the stuff that we talked about, the graphics, the cutscenes, and so on. The sequel came out just a few months later with no obvious changes and cost the same 5,500 yen. This really got people upset. The criticism here was all aimed at the fact that we now had yet another series with yearly updates that didn't change a single thing. And the worst review came right out and said that this was the same trick that Namco tried with Family Stadium 87. But at least Family Stadium 87 changed a few things. The new data version of this game changed practically nothing. Anyway, so there you have it. There you have it for Kyuukyoku Harikiri Stadium. In my opinion, this is really kind of a middle-of-the-road baseball game. I can't tell you quite yet how it compares to all 50-something Famicom baseball games because I've played through like 6 of them now, or 7 or something like that. I do think that the ability to pump up your team is cool, but it doesn't have that charm and that customizability that Baseball Stars has. In other words, in this game, you don't feel like you're going up the ladder one rung at a time. It doesn't have that feeling to it. It looks nice, right? There's a lot of cool quality of life stuff here, but the play control and the balance between teams, it's just not there, at least not in my opinion.